Hello, interwebs. I hope you're doing well. So for today's video, I'm going to give you a little extra treat than I normally would because I am going to be releasing a video that I normally would be releasing over on my secondary channel, Jessiegender After Dark. For those of you who don't know, Jessiegender After Dark is my secondary channel where I do extra videos that don't fit on my main channel, like my reactions, my sort of vlog style stuff, as well as reviews of different TV shows that I love. And currently I have been reviewing every episode of the TV show The Last of Us, which is the HBO Max adaptation of the famous video game of the same name. And I've been really enjoying the show so far, and I've been going through every episode over there. But today I reviewed the third episode of the season with my lovely friend Aronok because watching the episode, it ended up being, I think, one of the most beautiful and one of the most meaningful episodes of not only that show, but one that I've seen on television in a very long while. And I think it's because it was quite earnestly and honestly one of the most beautiful queer romances that I've ever seen put to screen. And I do not say that lightly. I say that with full meaning of the weight of what when I say that. It is an absolutely beautiful episode and story. And so I reviewed it with Aronok, and we were both really emotionally moved by it, and we were absolutely weeping and crying. And I only intended to release the review on my secondary channel, but I feel like we hit a lot of really relevant and important things that I think it's very meaningful to me to be able to share on the biggest platform that I have, because I want to just share the passion and love that I've had for this episode that Aronok also had for this episode, especially because in light of the video that we released last week about J.K. Rowling, that was very hard for both of us to get to express love of something, even if it is through tears. I think it is important to counterbalance horrible, traumatic stuff like that and celebrate beautiful things when we get beautiful things, especially when those things were not expected. So I hope you enjoy this review and discussion of the episode that I'm about to show all of you. Just a forewarning, we will do full spoilers for the episode, as well as a few hints towards spoilers within the video game, but nothing in terms of like future spoilers for beyond what the TV show has gone over so far. So if you are only watching the show, don't worry, we won't spoil ahead of that. So be very aware that there are some spoilers for the show up until the episode that we are at. Beyond that, no spoilers. But with that said, I hope you enjoy this review because I think it was very meaningful for me to do and talk about. So thank you so much, and I hope you enjoy. Hello, interwebs. I hope you're all doing well and not emotionally devastated right now.
I'm fine. What are you doing?
It's okay. You were weeping less than 2 minutes ago.
Don't tell them I was literally sobbing on a call with you for like 30 minutes.
Yeah.
I was sobbing. Like, I was tears.
All the tears. Anywho, you may have noticed that this video is a little bit different, but don't worry, you have clicked on the right video. I am doing my normal weekly review of The Last of Us show, this time season 1, episode 3, long time. And things are a little bit different today because normally I review these by myself, but I have brought my friend and co-writer on my main channel, Aronok, and also wonderful person and video essayist in her own right, to talk about this episode because we were working on a project together today, and a secret project that we're very excited about. And so we both were going to watch The Last of Us, and I said, well, why don't we watch it together and do the review together and do something new on the channel. So I was very excited to have you on to just discuss the episode and try something different here. But also, I'm very glad that this was the episode that you and I watched together.
I'm so because I'm so glad we got to watch this together because I needed another person there because this was like.
But literally, we were both sobbing for the last hour and a half.
Yeah, I'm fine.
I'm fine. I'm okay. I'm
okay. Emotionally. No, like seriously, the last 30 minutes was just sobbing, occasional pausing, sobbing some more, talking about the sobbing, and then sobbing. Yeah. I feel like we should discuss the stuff that happens before.
Let me I'll just intro us into this. So yeah. Listeners, to let you all know, we are going to do, I think just because of what this episode is, Normally I do a spoiler-free section on the discussion of the episode, but I think because of what this episode is, we are going to need to go full spoilers to really talk about this. And I'm also going to forewarn you, some of our discussion is going to be talking about the game as well, because I think this episode in particular, we need to discuss in relationship to how this story is told in the game, because I think it's very important to how we want to discuss it. So we're going to do full spoilers on episode 3, but if you have not watched the episode, I will just tell you this. It was honestly absolutely beautiful. One of the best episodes of TV I've watched in a long while, if ever. And I am honestly just kind of in awe that not only Last of Us did it, but they did it with this story.
There was about 5 to 10 minutes where both of us were basically just like back and forth, like, The Last of Us made this. The Last of Us made this. Like, just...
So full spoilers on it. You can go
yeah, so full spoilers. I'm also just, I think we should give some content warnings. This is going to be a heavy discussion because, one, we're going to discuss the game stuff. The game stuff involves some suicide and things. This kind of involves some adjacent things with that, though I would say it's a little bit closer to discussing something like Made. It's a different, but discussions of like death and suicide and queer violence and burying your gays and all that stuff. But I will say this, the reason we're discussing that is because this episode did it right. I really truly, I say this with absolute confidence, this is one of the best queer romances in media. Like, I am floored. Like, there's stuff before that starts we should probably discuss first, I think.
So just to let everyone know, we're talking about the episode. This is the episode with Bill and Frank. Frank is basically, and he's only mentioned and briefly seen in the game. We'll talk about that more in a little bit. But they basically, this whole story of this episode is an invented backstory for Bill and Frank, and it is honestly a very beautiful queer romance. So incredibly depicted, and the fact that, I mean, The Last of Us is a show about toxic love and how love can be incredibly toxic. And I think, and these are your words, Aeronox, so I want to make sure I don't.
But I mean, it's what the people who's writing it have talked about, right?
No,
like the writers have talked about that aspect of.
Well, I mean, the fact that they took that, they took a show about toxic love and took a queer story that was, we'll talk about it more, mishandled in the games. Very badly, I think, or in a very exploitational way.
It's not good.
Yeah, and managed to take that and give us not only improve upon it, but give us one of the most beautiful, almost non-tragic queer romance stories in TV. And doing a show about toxic love based on that story from the games is, I think, truly amazing.
I think. In a show that's discussed, for a show that's saying, hey, our mission statement is to discuss the ways that love can be twisted and become toxic and cause horrible things, to decide that we are going to subvert that one time, and that one time is going to be queer love. In a world where that so often is the only form of toxic love that is shown in media. Like, I was sobbing for so many reasons. I was emotional about what was happening to the characters, it was an emotional story, but it was also just emotional to get to see positive, well-handled, beautiful queer love on screen.
Not defined by trauma.
Not defined by trauma, but defined by their ability to connect with each other and help each other with their trauma. And defined by healing, and defined by living a satisfying, fulfilling life, and doing so with characters like the pandemic is set as starting in 2003. So
before a lot of our modern day thoughts about queer acceptance and
which
we'll talk about, because the way they depict that in this episode is so great with characters that even though the show takes place past 2003, they very much have a 2000, because of the pandemic, the fungal infection started in 2003. They very have a 2003 understanding of queerness, and the show
even visually, right? Every outfit, every piece of technology, all of it, they're very good. Okay, before we really dig into that, because I feel like we should.
I also want to say one. I also want to say one other thing too, because this is actually what hit me and almost made me cry while I was waiting for you to get ready for this. The fact that this is such a beautiful story told tragic, it is told tragically, but in a non-traumatic way. But it allows it to be two men who grow old together. And I just forget how much we don't get to see that story. We get to sometimes see older gay characters, but it's sort of like a cutesy background thing. It's to have that forefronted and getting to see gay characters, queer characters get to grow old together and be together and die together. It was actually really, really meaningful to me to be like, oh, I can have that. It really,
it just meant so much. Like, it meant so much. I think, like, not to bring in our outsiders too much into this, the last little bits kind of not been fun if you're trans.
we were literally earlier today when we were talking about our project that we're working on. We were commiserating about how hard it's been for us as two trans women to exist in the world right now. So to have this was today.
This is a really nice way to end the day, because like, obviously we released the video on J.K. Rowling the other day, which is a whole can of worms.
For those of you who don't, if you just follow me on this channel, listeners, we Aronach and I worked on a video on J.K. Rowling that was a big video, but very emotionally labor intensive video that we've been kind of like dealing with a lot of the outcome of.
Yeah, like I think we've kind of, I mean, even just leading up to it was emotionally dealing with stuff, and then the entire period afterward was emotionally dealing with stuff. It's
the comment section's been fun.
Yeah, I want to be clear, lots of lovely support. I really appreciate that. But like, so going into this episode, I was kind of steeling myself. Like, I was not expecting to open my heart as much like for this, because I was like, I was expecting what was going to happen in the game. And I was expecting to have to kind of emotionally process that. And then we talked about it, which partly why I wanted to review it with you, because I knew this is the Bill and Frank episode. I just wanted to be there with you, because we've had such a week that I just wanted to I wanted to be there with my friend. Both for myself, just because I was like, I can't watch this by myself. I want to watch it, but I can't.
We're going to talk about all of that. So let's get into actually talking about the episode proper, because I think we have a lot to say. And I think we were talking about this a moment ago before we started, is I kind of think it's best to talk about Bill and Frank's story, the sort of main segment, the flashback of the story that this episode focuses on, as its own thing first. And then we'll talk about the sort of bookends of the opening and closing of the episode with Joel and Ellie, because I think it'll be easier to talk about those as sort of bookends
their own
to the
things.
Story.
I think there's like one specific thing that's worth mentioning before we discuss the story, which just it's just that first scene, and there's two reasons why I say that.
The first scene with Joel
with the water was the first scene of the episode. First scene of the episode is Joel's hands. Joel's very beat up hands. And I think it's important to understand that hands play a really important role in queer cinema. It's a whole thing. It's a big, long history. I know you and I have talked about it in videos before. I mentioned it a fair bit, I think, in my Alice video, when I'm talking about like queer gays in cinema and stuff, particularly with the Wachowskis' work, The Bound, The Bound, which is magnificent. But so we start on the episode with Joel's hands, right? And Joel's hands are picking up these rocks. We don't understand what it is until we see him stacking them, and we realize Joel is having a funeral for Tess. And I think this is so important for what is going to happen throughout the rest of the episode. But the fact that it is centered on the hands first, and centered on the paying attention to things, and we'll get to why that line means something big in a bit. But I think, like, I realized this right after, because I was just looking at the notes, but that line later is a really important line from Frank. And I think it's the defining line of the episode, which is paying attention to things is how we show love. And the fact that Joel is like, I'm fucking emotional already. Joel is paying attention to these little things. Like, he's selective about what rocks he uses for Tess. This isn't some throwaway thing. And it's clearly not something he's done once. So as much as Joel has this whole veneer about not caring and not paying attention or whatever, he really is paying attention.
But he's not able to articulate it in any way. He does it by paying attention to things. Like, he, even in the first episode, without going all the way back to it, like, he wasn't really able ever to express his love to his daughter, but he was able to like show it by paying attention to her and spending time with her. And it's just he's just a character that like is not able to verbalize these things but pays attention to them, and that's how he's able to express it. But it can become very difficult for him to show that, and so when he does pay attention to things, it's difficult for him. And I think that's what we'll get into with the character of Ellie, as we talk about this episode and those juxtapositions at the beginning and the end of the episode, but also very much in juxtaposition with like Bill and Frank as well. I think.
100%.
So let's unless you have anything more to say before we get into
no, I think we should just go right to the flashbacks.
Yeah, so we start off the episode or we start off the flashback. So we begin the flashback of the episode going back to Bill at the beginning of the fungal infection, like a few days after, and we see the people being taken away to be killed, as we learn, which, I mean, it's number one, I will say, just the placement of this in the episode, like we're used to in the past 2 episodes, having the flashback to be at the start of the episode, like the beginning of it, and then flashing forward to what is now the present day of 2023.
This episode is breaking so many rules of Last of Us storytelling on like 10 different levels.
Even
and the
its
fact
own
that it
grammar that it did it in that's already established
within the TV show and with the games. And I think I love that they did that by expressing that with the preamble not being there. And you're like, oh, opening credits. Oh, it's Joel and Ellie.
Oh, I guess
we're doing a flashback now. And it's like it instantly tells you this isn't the story you thought you knew. And I love that they do that. And I love that they're setting that up so well. And
it's doing it with the queer story too, which is also like
purposeful.
kind of like queerness is like itself like disrupting the
it's disrupting the flow of time and story, which is beautiful. Again, this isn't this isn't just a gay romance. It is a very queer romance. Like it is
the way that this is
using queer filmmaking. It's using queer storytelling and story structure. Like, I mean, obviously, as the person who wrote a giant fucking essay about queer temporary
that
being
got recognized by the BFI, by the way.
I'm gonna stop, Jesse.
I will praise you to heaven. Everyone, listeners, all of you should go watch Aronof's queer relativity video because it got recognized by the BFI, and it's amazing. And it is quite literally about how queer stories break temporality. So the very fact that this, and I know I've embarrassed you, sorry, but the very fact that the show is about breaking the rules of the show, the structure of the show, the basic grammar of the show that it's already established, breaking the rules of the game, feels very queer in a very disruptive way, which is what queer stories often do to the storytelling medium as a whole, which I think is...
When you mix that storytelling break with the first sentence we hear out of Bill's mouth being, "Not today, you new world order jackboot fucks." Like, that is a fucking line. And I'm sorry, but in the context of 2023, where there are queer people being fucking arrested for being queer in various states in the US, and we're seeing American police and soldiers march people off.
It very clearly cut to a black woman, by the way, too, when they show the people that get
they very clearly show who they're picking to send to the QZ and who they're not. And it's not subtle about how America makes choices in that way. And I think that's so interesting. I think it's also interesting that we start with Bill obviously having
prepared for all of
some questionable views as well.
We have the "Don't Tread on Me" flag, and I actually, when we were watching that together, I was like, this is going to be interesting, because I was like, maybe he would be have a lot of like overt homophobia, but like internalized homophobia that he would express, or like wondering, because he is very anti-establishment.
I'm so glad that they didn't have him like saying slurs or something that. They handled it subtly and carefully, but I think it's so valuable because you see that flag at the start, you never see it again. But it's removed from the garage.
But it speaks to, and this is something we'll get into as we go, how well Nick Offerman plays this character.
Oh my god!
In his, you can tell, and let's get to it, because then we see this whole sequence where he preps for the pandemic. Like he knows it's coming. He's got all this stuff. He's very much like the prepper who like has plans. Like, I'm enacting the plan for so long. And there's almost a sense of like joy in that, because like he watches on his screens like the zombies, the infected get blown up. Like, this is something that he's kind of like, I'm proven right here, and in that first section.
And also, I think it's worth pointing out, like, he has this whole montage that I find really interesting, where we get to see some amount of joy of like, oh, I can just fucking go into Home Depot and take whatever the fuck I want, and I can set up my space the way I want it to be. And he has that first meal by himself alone. And that meal, that specific meal, is going to become a motif throughout the episode about loneliness and connection and love. And again, these subtle things.
A
right?
gay man having to eat by himself all alone and not being able to find connection.
Like, it's saying a thing. And again, 2003, right? Like, it's worth mentioning the time period it's set in. And so we cut to a couple of years later after we see him sort of watch that one zombie die, and he's further setting up his space, and we see he's got like the fence and everything, and a trap goes off. He goes out and he finds Frank.
And what I love about this too, and this is something that like is interesting, is like Frank doesn't know how to lie very well.
Yeah, it's so cute.
And what I like the establishment, it is very cute, but I like the establishment, and we also know based on having seen the episodes prior that Bill and Frank do end up together. So there's this undercurrent of throughout the story that like, because Bill has all this stuff, you could have easily seen Frank be a liar and trying to use like queerness to trick Bill, like pretending to be gay to trick Bill to get his stuff. And I love that the show never plays into that, never leads with that. There's never that sense, like it's because they established that Frank is a bad liar, and they established that they are together earlier on. It showcases that when Frank is expressing care for Bill later on, it is always earnest and true, and it undercuts immediately that sort of like the subversive or like lying gay.
Yeah, one I love, because again, the first two episodes, right, we know it's Bill and Frank's codes, that Bill and Frank are together and they are Joel's friends. We know this from episode 1. And so the show has reinforced it twice at minimum. I know there's a couple of other scenes where they mention Bill and Frank, and it's always Bill and Frank, right? So there's a recognition that they're a couple as well by other people and by the show before we even get to see them. And so it removes all of this tension, because The Last of Us knows that there's always going to be tension in its storytelling. And there's moments in this episode where I was very tense about what was going to happen because of certain things. But instead, we just get to sit in these moments of like, Bill lets Frank in, and we can, Nick Offerman is doing the most work with his face. Like, I genuinely, if this man doesn't win a fucking award for his performance in this episode, like if he doesn't win an award for his performance in this episode, it is one of the best acting performances of the decade.
You see his sadness and loneliness.
Eyes, all eye acting.
When they're at the pit and he just gets him out and Frank says, "Can I come in?" And there's not even a line said really, but Bill Offerman just shows the loneliness in Bill's face. And you get why he's letting Frank in, because of how lonely he is. But he doesn't say it. It's just all played in Bill.
You see the entire journey, emotional journey, in one shot, just with his face. And it's so carefully handled. And even as like once Bill has let Frank inside, he lets Frank shower and he preps dinner for them. And Frank is just this perfectly earnest person. It's like, I love Frank so much.
That he's earnest, yeah.
I love that he's just so earnest. I love that about him. And
he knows Bill is gay right from the start too.
Yeah, and there's these subtle bits of like queer coding that is real queer coding, that they're very careful about how they handle that, where it's like, this is queer subtext between two queer men that are trying to communicate to each other, hey,
we're safe.
I understand you.
Because it's again, seeing of 2003, the way he
holds the wine is used as like a brilliant, the way he preps food, and the fact that like food is such a, again, the fucking line, paying attention to things is how we show love. And Bill pays attention to these little things about how he preps food. Like, there's a care in how he presents the dish to Frank. It's a way of showing love, because Bill doesn't know how to talk about it. He can't say, hey, I'm lonely. It's all in his eyes, it's all in his face, and it's all in his movements. And it's just like Joel.
Yep, it's just like Joel. And Frank catches all of it, because he's also paying attention too. And again, this is going back to what we're talking with queer coding in 2003, and even more before this too, but even still in 2003, gay people were not able to express that they were gay and feel safe. And so they always had to do these, like, is this person safe to come out to? is this person safe to be open to? And the
Mhm.
fact that they were doing this in like a story about like, can I trust this person during this story in this pandemic world? There's that element to it, but it is just like, can I be open about it? And Frank instantly calls all of this and sees Bill instantly. So when he goes over to his piano and he goes to his
Paying
music,
attention to things.
yeah,
Paying attention to things is how you show love. Like it's
and
Ah.
he's going through his piano. He's like, oh, all this music is bad. And then he's like, well, it's my mother's music. And he finds the song
one
that is Bill's, and he knows it's Bill's because he can read him. And Bill plays. Well, Bill says
so
no.
Frank
Don't play that
tries
song.
to play the song. Frank tries to play the song, but he doesn't do it the way that Bill wants. And it's so cute because Bill can tell that Frank is trying to do something nice for him. And then Bill says, no, let me. And both of them playing the song is them telling the other person, hey, I know you.
Mm-hmm.
The fact that like it's Frank, Frank finding it and saying like, this is the right song for you. And it is like, it's beautiful. And then Bill sits down and the way he plays that song, like there's so much loneliness in his voice, in his face, like all of these subtle little acting choices. But I think most of all, it's yearning. And that is such a like intensely queer feeling. And
when Frank asks him, who's the girl you're singing about? And Bill says, there is no girl. And Frank says, I know. Because he knew. And that was like, that's that moment. It's like, that's the line where like the seal is, where like it's already said, but it's not been said. And that's the moment where that's broken. And then they kiss at that moment. Cause that's when they sort of like acknowledge like, yes, this is who we are. And I love,
Bill's
this is
so scared. Bill's so scared when they kiss.
Why I love this scene is where I loved Nick Offerman so much, is because when they kiss, Frank is a little bit more like okay, like open to it instantly, but Bill doesn't pull away. Nick Offerman doesn't pull away from the kiss, but you can tell he's like stiff and kind of like shocked that it just happened, because as we learn in a few moments, he's never been with a guy this way before, because again, 2003, not being able to be out and be open. And so I just love how Nick Offerman is just playing this like surprised, scared, but excited shock moment in his face, but not pulling away from it, but just playing it all in his
he plays
stiffness.
He shows the desire too. Like it's all of those feel. It's such an impressive performance. And again, like 2003, we are coming in the context of 2003, right? The AIDS epidemic, while not as bad as the 90s and 80s, is still a thing within the queer community. And in the context of a show that is discussing a fucking outbreak, right? And the way that it isolates people. Can I trust you? There's another layer there where, and even just like Frank saying, like, when Frank says that about the song, says like, who are you singing about? It's like, it tells you something about Frank too. It tells you that this man knows what it's like to lose love. And it's all of the, like beautifully, intensely, carefully queer. Every scene. And so we get, and then we just get to see them be happy together in bed.
And like they have sex, and it's not
objectified. It's not objectified.
It feels like they actually like understood, because when you see gay, when two gay men have sex on screen, usually when it's two women, it's like very ugly and male gaze. When two gay men have sex on screen, it pulls away, because it's like, oh, we don't want to, we're grossed out by two gay men having sex. But like
it does a weird sort of fetishistic approach, which is still kind of, it's still othering. Usually it's always othering, but the form of that othering is either fetishistic or disgusted. And this is like, no, this is beautiful. This is a one rare moment in this show of something that's beautiful. And I think that was the first time I was like starting to get a little emotional, was the kiss scene, and the fact that like they were so slow. And then we jumped years later, and I think this is such a clever choice, is we jump years later to them arguing. And it doesn't pretend like love is magically perfect and easy.
Yeah, no, exactly. But it's also about like them this is where we get that line that we've been using this whole time about like love is how we
Paying
is paying
attention to
attention to
things is
things.
how we well, and there's one other part of that line that's going to be so important when we discuss the end of the episode, but it needs to be said in the context. So Frank is wanting to fix up the area around their house, and he wants to like turn the boutique into a nice space for them. And Bill doesn't see the purpose because it's not utilitarian. And Frank says to him, paying attention to things is how we show love. Let me love it how I want to. And there's so much underneath that statement, because it's saying, Bill, I need you to pay attention to me in this way. And Bill hears that. And again, it's both of them just continuously learning to communicate emotionally and healthily across the entire episode. The Bill we see at the beginning is so not the Bill at the end.
And what I love most about this, because I said this when we were watching the episode, and we'll talk more. I'll save the full discussion on the comparison to the game for the end moment when the show itself calls it out. But I literally was just like knowing where the game is going to go. Oh, I see this as being tragic, and Bill's going to fail to pay attention to him, and that's what's going to lead to what happens to Frank in the game. I thought that's where they were heading with it, and I thought so too. And I love that they don't do that. But it was just that moment of being like, oh, this is the moment where Bill can chooses to pay attention to him or not, and he does. And I adore that with all of my heart, that's just the way to do it. We'll get the comparison to the game in just a little bit, but like that choice was great. And I also love that this is just a bit of humor, but also I do like the line that Frank says, like, oh, like you're like he's sort of calling out his very utilitarian view on the world and being like the government's all Nazis, and Bill's like, the government is all Nazis. He's like, yeah, I guess so. Fedra is all fucking Nazis. But
that is such a good line.
But again, I like that the show is also being very
2023, in the context of 2023, having queer characters call the government Nazis is
both of the 2023 today of the queer characters being like, and the show itself being like, hey, guess what, Fedra? They're meant to be fascist assholes, in case you weren't very clear.
Well, and I think it's worth mentioning too, because like in the second game, the second major queer romance of these games is between a Jewish queer woman and Ellie. Like Dinah's a fucking incredible character, and she deserved better, frankly.
We'll get
from the story, but that's a whole other discussion. But we know that the government in this world is bigoted in multiple ways. Like this is textual, and so just like the government in our world is fucking. I just want to include that every time I can, because not enough people are paying attention to the interconnection between the anti-Semitism that's going on and the queerphobia. But like, I appreciate that the show is saying that.
Yeah. And then moving on, we then and also the other thing too is the part of the reason that Frank wants to clean up the area, and this leads into our next scene, is he wants to make connection with others. And he's saying if we clean this area, if we pay attention to it, others will come and we can actually make friends. Cut to on a tour of coming back, like thank God.
There's one line there. There's one line there. There's one that's where Bill's like, oh, I don't need friends, and Frank is basically going, you thought you didn't need me. Like he's not saying that, but he's kind of saying that subtextually, and it's like, no, we're going to have friends. Yeah. And it's that line that we then cut to Joel, Tess, and them having a fun dinner date. Like it's so cute. I love it.
Yeah, it was great. And I love like Frank or Phil just putting his gun on the table and like just I'm going to protect what's mine and being very reticent. But then like you also see Tess, who's a character that is we saw last episode, wants to have hope about the world, and so she kind of wants to have that hope and that friendship and that domesticity that she doesn't get to have later on. And I love that we get to see Tess exist as a character, not in the hellhole that she exists both in the game and the prior episodes that we've seen so far. We get to see her be who she could have been in another life, in another world, and which makes
the end of episode 2 so much more fucking devastating. And this entire episode just makes the ending of episode 2 just devastating. Again, it starts with the funeral of Tess, and that is a connective tissue across this fight. And I'm glad that they brought her back, and I'm glad that she got to have some more work on the show.
I mean, I'm here for Anna
so
Torv
good as Tess.
Is mutual Fringe fans. I'm like
big Fringe fans, yeah. Anna Torv is just so good, and like I'm so glad that she got to have these scenes. And like I love it too, because it draws all these parallels between Tess and Joel and Bill and Frank. But again, well, Tess and Joel's dynamic will devolve into something, you know, further and further toxic to some degree,
or at
as we
least
saw in
very,
the first.
very, very distant. And
They
like,
care about each other, but like they're so damaged.
well, she sort of, yeah, and she sort of uses him as like like almost like a child, and also tack dog in a ways at certain points in the episode 1 to a degree too.
Yeah, that too. And I find it interesting because it's drawing these parallels, but again, queerness is set apart in positive ways. And I said this earlier, but it is so rare that queerness isn't represented in a toxic way. And most often queerness is the only toxic love that is shown in a piece of work. I think about like something like Buffy the Vampire Slayer, right? Where like, not that it's the only toxic love in that show, but like, you know, and especially when we talk about like queer media of the time period this is set in, like it's saying so much. It's saying so much in the subtext.
And speaking of that, one of the other things that I do like, and this is something you drew attention to, is when Joel and Bill are having their conversation. Joel, I love their dynamic, but Joel at one point like sort of says yours and mine. He sort of talks about like Bill and Frank being together, and he's accepting of their being gay, but in a very 2003 way, because Joel would not have the language of
in a good way. To be clear,
he's accepting, but he's accepting of them in a 2003 way in the sense that like he doesn't have the language of partner yet. He says yours and mine instead of like your partner or your husband, like
because he doesn't know what to call it. And I love it.
Yeah. So because it's a very like he is accepting, but in a way that like someone in 2003 would have the vocabulary for, even though that at the time the scene is probably set in like 2017, but still because of the pandemic, it's sort of like stuck in amber in that way.
I also love that Joel in that scene, like as we cut to like Tess and him are about to leave, and he stops Bill, and he doesn't need to say these things, but Joel is a character, I think, defined by saying he doesn't care and then caring a lot. Joel cares too much and it hurts him. Like that's why he's so closed off. And I love that Joel shows some really, really genuine care for Bill in that moment. He shows so much genuine care for Bill, and that it's never easy for either of them because they don't find friendship easy, but it was genuine. Like their connection was genuine, Bill and Joel's. And I think it really reflects a lot of men's like difficulties in
I was just say that
having friendships.
At the end, in the scene at the end with the letter where he is making it's like, oh, you were never really my friend, but I respect you. It's like that's how a lot of dudes like feel.
It's like that emotional
I can't
distancing.
love you, no homo, bro.
I can't say I love you, but which is so funny because but at the same time, like Bill is so beautifully able to express his love for Frank. Like the longer we see them together, and so we cut further forward ahead. And
we get the scene where Bill, this is another scene that could have gone toxic really well, and I love how it didn't, but Frank has the strawberries that he plants with.
Well, before that they're working out together, and there's no judgment of Bill for not being like a super athletic person. Like
which is
the
such
show
a big thing
doesn't
in the gay
do that.
Community. Like there's a lot of body fat phobia and body
shaming. And I'm so glad that the episode actively does not do that. Like they're just like, and so Frank leads them to the strawberry patch. And strawberries have been a long-standing sort of symbol of love in media, and we get to see again one of the only like pure positive things we've seen in this entire show, and it's fucking pure. It's queer love again. It's like it's
the shot of them with the sunlight falling through and them kissing each other. And I also love that like I was worried that the moment where Frank says, "I traded one of your guns for this," and I thought that Bill was, you traded one of my, like it was going to be an argument moment, but there's no argument. He's just like no, I understand. And
like Bill has. I
thought that was going to be a moment of an issue.
And I love it because it's telling us that Bill has become a healthier partner that can communicate with his love. And so Bill, Bill's like, like he's like a little annoyed, but not that annoyed. He's like, oh, like which gun? Like that's like he wants to make sure it's not his favorite guns. Like it's not even really about the trading of the gun. It's just that like, oh, which one was it? And then it's done. It's over because
I could see in a worse show, it would have been like, you traded my gun, how dare you, for these stupid strawberries? And then like it would have been
a bad show would have done that.
yeah.
And again, I feel like potentially the Last of Us video game would have done that, to be honest.
We'll get there. We'll get there. Yeah.
We'll get there. So again, like, you and I are just sitting there and we're like waiting for the fucking like
shoot a drop.
Shoot a drop. We're waiting for the shoot a drop. It's like, it's gonna go bad. It's gonna go bad, and it's gonna go bad.
Listeners,
something wrong is gonna happen.
If you are not queer, I know a lot of you in my audience watching this are also queer on this channel. But if you are not a queer person watching media about queer stuff, just know that, like, for queer people watching queer media and queer love, we are always waiting for the shoe to drop. We are always waiting for the moment where it becomes traumatic, where it becomes painful, where it becomes horrible and painful, and that never happens in this episode. Yes, there's sadness and tragedy, but not trauma.
I want to talk about the ending in the context of another show, actually, when we get there, because of that.
Well, speaking of tragedy, oh yeah, we'll get there.
Yeah.
But speaking of tragedy, we cut to the next scene where we get to have the action moment of, like, the Raiders coming as Joel foretold, and it's a cool action beat. But like, and it's like getting to see Bill's traps and all that jazz, which is fun. The flamethrowers, but it really more ends on Bill and Frank like caring for each other, as Bill's like, Frank is like, you're not gonna die. I'm gonna take care of you. It's gonna be fine. And like he does it in a way that understands Bill. He's like, tell me about the list that you made. Tell me about the list. Yeah.
And the fact that Bill hasn't told him there's a list. Frank just knows that Bill did it. And Bill is so preoccupied. He doesn't give a shit about himself. And I think there's such a huge scene because, again, Bill, when we meet him, only about himself, right? And now the only thing that matters to Bill in his life is Frank. It is his purpose. In his own words, it is his purpose. And he thinks he's dying. And here's a really fucking beautiful moment because it tells us something about Joel too. Bill tells him, I need you to call Joel. You can't be alone by yourself here. Joel will take care of you. And I just...
Because he knows Joel will take care of him. Yeah.
He knows Joel is a good person. Deep down, under all of that fucking trauma and pain, that Joel cares. And the fact that Bill would entrust Joel with the one fucking thing he cares about in his entire life,
Yep, I know.
But all that matters to Bill is Frank. And it's so beautiful and lovely. And Frank's like, no, you're not dying here. Like, I'm going to be with you. We're going to get through this.
And he does it through a way by enabling Bill's like, yeah, tell me. I just love that the Frank understands enough. Just like, yeah, tell me about this. He knows that it's there. And he's just like, tell me about that. It'll keep you focused because I know that's how you think.
And again, we're seeing the entirety of a queer romantic life. It is a life we're getting to see. We're getting to see them grow old together. That doesn't fucking happen in queer media.
Which is the next bit.
The next scene.
They are old and gray together in 2013. And I love you get to see the domesticity of this. Again, it's just so beautiful. In this show about fungal infection zombies, we get like this beautiful old couple. And this is what honestly made me cry. Was just getting to see. I didn't know how much it meant to me to see like two people grow old and gray together, because you never get to see that with queer characters. You get to see
I'm trying really hard to cry right now.
I mean, every once in a while you get to see maybe older queers, but they're never focused on. They're never the part. You never get to see the arc of that.
We never get to see their story.
Yeah.
And in a world that is killed a lot of our queer elders, I think that's a huge part of it too, because we don't get to see ourselves aging. I think about this a lot in that cishet people are so terrified of aging in certain ways. And I think as a trans person, especially, but I think any queer person, getting to age as yourself is for a lot of us, for a lot of our life, like a dream that we don't think we'll ever get to have.
The only aging old person we get to see is alone.
And so getting to see them be old, like actually old, and it's not a negative, and the show doesn't think it's a negative, and they don't think they've got to live happy, fulfilling, satisfied lives.
Their house is filled with Frank's art.
And Bill's touches too. And again, I keep thinking about this fucking line. Paying attention to things is how we show love. And you look at that space and you think about the start of the episode and what that space was like when it was Bill by himself and he was performing masculinity, and it was empty, and it was
Don't tread on, just had a "Don't tread on me" flag, and now
It's
it's just filled with
miserable.
life
And
and
then
art and caring.
and the paintings are beautiful and lovely, and they're all of Bill. Like, all of Frank's paintings are of Bill, and I'm just like, there's so much love here. There's so much telling us about their lives, just in these little vignettes that we've got.
Yeah.
And I'm
And
so glad that this episode was allowed to be an hour and 20 minutes long in order to tell that story, right? And so we see that, like, Frank is clearly dealing with some sort of health issues, right? And here's a little thing: Joel's clearly providing them with the medication that's helping Frank function, which tells us so much about Joel. Because again, Joel can say he doesn't fucking care. He cares. He does. And again, paying attention to things, so we show love. Like, it's just beautiful that we get positive fucking love here. And
the scene where, like,
Frank,
Nick Offerman just winks at him and they just smile.
It's so cute. It's so Frank is painting, and Bill comes into the garden, and he just and walks. And Frank has a little, like, and, like, there's so much joy. There's so much queer joy. And then we wake up the next day.
Can I do one other thing too?
Yeah, please do.
This is something I don't want to speak for this community, but also the fact that he's in a wheelchair in any media, but especially in apocalypse media. Like, having someone in a wheelchair is usually seen as like, oh, we have to take care of this person. It's horrible. They, like, we're gonna put us in danger. And the fact that there's love and care, and this character gets to survive and live a happy life in a wheelchair in a post-apocalypse show.
The fact that the show is so explicitly saying caring is good, and that you can live a meaningful, good life as a disabled person, it matters a lot. I'm sure there's gonna be people that have
nuanced critiques
their own issues, and, like, I'm not going to speak specifically to the experience of wheelchair users. I'm not disabled in that way. I'm disabled in other ways. I deal with a lot of chronic illness stuff, that does affect my health, and I'm just really glad about it. And then, Frank saying, like, I'm satisfied with my life. I want to have one. And he says, like, I've had good days and I've had bad days with you too, but I've had more good days with you than anyone else. Give me one more good day. And he lays out what his ideal day is. And Bill's like, he's crying. And the fact that, like, this character we meet is so emotionally stunted. And here he is comfortably crying with someone else. And then Frank says, I'm gonna go down to the boutique. I'm gonna select out our clothes. You're gonna wear what I, like, tell you to wear, and then we're gonna get married. 2003 is the setting that they come from, like, within our context.
Gay marriage.
There was never legal marriage, and they get to grow old together, and they get to marry, and they get to live their lives as they wanted, and oh, I'm gonna cry. And then he ends it with, and then I want you to, crush up these pills, and we're gonna put them in my wine after we have a really nice dinner together, and I'll fall asleep in your arms. And Bill's like, I don't know if I can do it. And Frank says, do you love me? And Bill says yes. And Frank says, then love me the way I want you to. And again, I come back to that fucking line. Paying attention to things is how we show love. Let me love it how I want to. Like, and the music choice here, it's beautiful. We get to see this beautiful montage of their last happy day, where they get to be satisfied with their life. And they have the same meal that they had on their first day.
But Bill sits close to him as opposed to
instead
across the
of
table,
across
scared.
the table, like, they're sharing their space. And we see this dining room that we opened with, this sparse dining room. Now it's full of life and plants and art and all of the markers of their love for each other. And it's the same wine that they had that first day. And I keep thinking about fucking paying attention to things is how we show love. And think about that. Bill has thought about that for almost 20 years. He's kept all of those little details of their first day because it was that important. It was a way of showing love for Frank. And Bill makes a point of crushing up and showing Frank that he's doing what he wants before giving him the glass. And once they have it, you know, Frank says, there was pills in the bottle, weren't there?
And
Bill says, I'm old. I'm satisfied. You were my purpose. And he says, this isn't the tragic suicide at the end of the play. And that's the moment that broke me.
Yeah, and the reason it broke me, and this is where I wanted to call out, and I'm sorry, I'll take over if you need a second, because I've been crying while you're talking too.
Oh my God. Sorry.
The reason the line is powerful in and of itself, but as people have played the game, and this is spoilers for the game, everybody, in the game, and like content warning for suicide here, in the game, how this story is played, we never meet Frank alive in the game. We just meet Bill. He's still that paranoid type of character that he is basically at the start of the show. And he's lived with Frank forever, but he hasn't really changed in those aspects. And Frank's character in the game, because he has felt not paid attention to, dies by suicide. And they find his body in the game. Joel and Bill find his body because he killed himself because he felt so alone because Bill never paid attention to him. And it's horrible and tragic, and it is
one of
it's
burying your gaze.
It's one of those things. Well, here's the thing. It's one of those things that the game got wrong, and it's like in the time it was written, you could see where they thought it was like, oh, we are being progressive in showing a queer romance, but it's that doing all the things that we're saying that we don't want to see in a queer romance, defined by trauma, characters having to die alone and sad. Like Bill in the game still lives is still alive at the end, but now he lives alone and sad, knowing that his failure to care for Frank led to Frank dying by suicide.
Because Frank got trapped behind the zombies and couldn't get back to him, and Bill was like, oh, Frank will be fine, I don't need to go out and do it because I'm too, like, again, it does this thing of traumatizing queer people, blaming the queer characters for that trauma, and also not even making it textual that they're gay within the game. It's confirmed by writers afterwards. So the people who don't want it, all the gamer
it's
heavily implied. It's heavily implied.
But all the gamer bros who could ignore it, and many gamer bros want to ignore queerness because of capital G gamer culture, could ignore it if they don't want to. It hits all, like, not to say that there isn't some cool stuff about the fact that like there is a gay romance in a video game of that level at that time, like.
2013 wasn't much happening.
Yes, so I'm saying like, oh, this with like there is a lens of modern looking back at it, but that there are also problems, and so the show in this moment literally saying like this is not that, like quite literally the show is saying this is not the tragic suicide at the end of the story like that game had. So the show is not only saying that, it's textually calling out the game's version of the story.
And it's so important to understand, and I think this is worth discussing, is that the show isn't saying anything along the lines of like, oh, if you're disabled, you should just die. It's not doing anything gross like that, which I really fucking appreciate because a lot of stuff does that, right? It is not saying, oh, this is some tragic suicide. No, it is two very elderly people who are saying, I'm satisfied with my life and I want to pass away peacefully with the person I love, and that is fucking beautiful. I like, and just the fact that not only does it solve every issue I have with how these characters were handled in the game, it says explicitly in the text that it was wrong. That touches my heart so much because, like, the scene in the game to me is. Some of my problem with some of The Last of Us is that occasionally I think it does this thing where it engages with other people's experience of trauma without understanding the severity of what that is to engage with, and very like nonchalantly and finding Frank's body, showing someone who is again, big content warning, right? Showing the body that is hanging because they show it on screen, right? Like we're
I don't
subjected
even
to
think we
that.
ever get to see Frank's face, do we, in the game?
I don't even know if we do, but we see his body. Like we see his legs, we see some of his torso, we see the neck, we see the, and so they're bury their fucking gays in the game before we even meet them. And the only sight of them we have is something that is a way too fucking common trauma and tragedy that queer people have had to deal with. And I've always really, really hated that moment. So I was coming into this episode, you know, mentally preparing myself to have a conversation about like mishandlings of suicide trauma as someone who, you know, is very specific. Like I've touched on this a lot in my essays, but like is very specifically survived that specific type of attempt because of queer phobia. You just sorry.
I wish I could give you a hug. I'm sorry, we're just at the moment.
It just means a lot to me to see that called out. And for this show of all shows, this show about how tragic and toxic love can be, it understands something that is so core to storytelling, which is that you need contrast. And the fact that it chooses to do the contrast this way, and I mean, it shows that a little bit with Sarah and Joel, obviously, but like the fact that it chooses to say queer love is beautiful and valuable and leads to a fulfilling, satisfied life. And I know some people are going to get mad at the show because they're going to say, oh, it's burying your gays because you killed the gay character. No, it's not the same thing. It is not traumatic. It is not using us as some tragedy porn for cis people and cishet people and whatever to watch, right? It is saying that they deserve to have a lovely, joyous, fulfilling lifetime, full life. And it makes me think of another show which got that erroneous fucking criticism, which is Bly Manor, which I fucking love. And like, I mean, I love all of Mike Flanagan's work that I've seen. You know, I did a big video on Midnight Mass that is really meaningful to me, which connects with a lot of feelings I have about this episode, to be honest. But you know, at the end of Bly Manor, like it does something I think very similar in some ways, which is that it allows this queer couple to live a full, complete, loving life. And it shows us all of that. There isn't a tragic sudden death, unlike what happens to every straight couple in that show, because that happens to every straight. Again, it's not burying your gays. Sorry, the Bly Manor thing, but I know Last of Us is going to get the same criticism in the same way, and it's going to really fucking bother me, because I actually think it's really fucking valuable. I think it's really fucking valuable to say that queer people can live a full, fulfilling life together that is joyous. And it's not, that doesn't mean it's magically easy, like, but it's genuine and real and complete. And that's
the thing that I'll say two things. Number one, I agree with all of you, and I want to say the moving thing first. Just I usually, when I write and when I like things that I want to write about, I usually follow the things that hit me in the heart. And when I heard you talking about this just a moment ago, the word that hit me the most is like hearing that queer romance is valuable. Just like that word valuable, that I don't think that that's something that we see enough of about queer romances, is that it is valuable to have lived that life, to be those people that get to live that. It is valuable to have that in our media, in our storytelling, for other people to see queer stories in this way, because I feel like we as a society and as people and culture don't value queerness at all. And to say that the queer romance is valuable to everybody and to ourselves, I think is very meaningful. And I want to quick say this, like everything that Aaron said, I 100% agree with, and I think this is beautiful. But there's also, if I may be my little petty self for just a second, there is a part of me that is like, I am so happy that this show that is an adaptation of a AAA video game told this story, because I know that every single gamer bro who hated fucking Halo, who hated all these shows, like, look, The Last of Us is doing it right, it's doing it amazingly, and then they're gonna sit through all of this and watch a queer romance story that is beautiful and amazing. When a lot of them will yell about like wokeness in media and da 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 da, and have to look at a beautiful queer romance story told in this way in a show that I know they're going to venerate. I think there's a part of me that's a little spiteful and like being like, yeah, but also I hope it's a really, I thought it was going to be petty. I actually really am like, no, I think it's very valuable that this show gets that right for people that will get to see that normally would not seek out this type of story. So for this type of story to be told in this way, I think in this show, I think is really meaningful.
Yeah, like I think, I struggle to think of like a favorite episode of a TV show when someone asks that type of question, and I know this episode is going to sit there with me because I think it is genuinely like that. Just Bill and Frank's life story on its own, nothing else, but like is one of the most beautiful fucking love stories I've ever seen in any piece of media. I think it is perfectly handled. And I just think that it was so overwhelming, like having the realization that this show that is so about awful things isn't going to force me to watch that again, like so many other pieces of media have. And it's going to let us have something beautiful and beautiful, but not romanticized, not fake, but real. Like I think about those lines about I've had bad days with you too, right? The acknowledgement that romance, love, a long-term relationship is work and it's hard, but it's worth it. And that queer characters, queer people deserve happiness, and that of all the fucking shows to give that is one that is so from a franchise about misery. And I just, it is genuinely one of the best actions of adapting anything I've ever seen. Oh, sorry, my camera glitched out. I'll try to fix it.
And
sorry
one
about
thing
that, audience.
No, you're fine. The one thing that I want to add to this is to like, and it feels weird to go back to Joel and Ellie, so I'll get back to them in just a second after everything we said, but we'll talk about, we'll just hit the highlights of things we want to say about them. But the fact that the episode ends on pulling out through the window, the open window that is in their room, that we learn from the letters, like he left a window open so there wouldn't be smell and everything, which is a very practical thing for Bill to have done. But it pulls out, and it's the shot of the window is the open window. I don't know if it's meant to be the same one, but it evokes the window that is the opening, the start menu of the video game. If you play the video game, the opening shot of the video game is a window open, and so it is evoking that imagery and saying like this.
And it's evoking a second window, a really important window, and I doubt they'll do it, but if they want to really fucking emotionally ruin us in the second season, if they make Bill and Frank's place the place that Dinah and Ellie go to raise Dinah's kid, I'm just saying it would be really fucking beautiful and painful, and it would ruin me.
It would be great. But also just staying on this, I just think like the fact that they like code the start menu of the game is like this queer romance moment of love, I think is really just a cool recontextualization of that. So
again, this is why I brought up the other thing. It's also a refutation of because that shot represents the disconnection between Ellie and Dinah.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And that sorrow, it represents queer trauma in Last of Us 2. And here it represents, like, again, it's taking all of these things that fucking hurt for queer audiences and saying, just this once, you don't have to deal with that here.
Which is really, so it feels weird, but it is worth talking briefly to Joel and Ellie. So to just talk about Joel and Ellie, I think we just hit some of the highlights of it. We have I do really love at the beginning of the episode that Ellie, after the funeral with Joel, that Ellie sort of like, I'm not apologizing for Tessa's death. I don't owe anything. That's not my fault. So I'm not apologizing for it. And Joel sort of like being like, oh, like she knows how to stand up for herself, and also like recognizing like, oh, I've been blaming her for something that isn't her fault. I made the choice. It's on me. It's my job to protect. I made the choice to protect her and take care of her. And I cannot blame her for the choice that I made to do that and the cost that it has for me. And that's, it's really an interesting,
like that moment.
Yeah, it was really, really nice. And then something into where we have the moments where like he's scavenging for stuff in the drawers, which is kind of like evoking the video game where you like scavenge for stuff. But he also has, as you mentioned, the dad line of like, I'm zeroing in on it.
He has this line, and it is the most fucking dad line ever. Yeah, where he's like, I know where it is. I'm just zeroing in on it. And like, it has the energy of my dad when he's like, where's my keys? And like, you know they're, I know where they are. I just can't remember. Like, I love my dad. My dad can't find anything that he leaves behind. I thought it was so funny. Like just Joel being like, of course I know where they are. Doesn't know where they are. Like it's such a funny little moment. And then I love how they start using silence. Like we talked about this a lot, that the use of silence in this show is really carefully chosen. It's really cleverly chosen. And Ellie goes in this basement, and then we get this scene with her where there's almost a fascination with this trapped infected and almost a fascination with
yeah.
Oh my god, the effects department. It's really well done. I hate it. Thanks guys.
Gross.
I hate it.
I love it.
Very well done. I hate it. But so she, you know, she cuts open the forehead of this infected, and we see the like, oh, it's like,
yeah.
And then she kills it. And there's this, again, I feel like they're doing a thing of having Ellie almost be drawn in by violence in a weird way, which I think is really interesting in the context of an audience that's played The Last of Us 2 or is aware of The Last of Us 2, because we know that Ellie is going to have a huge amount of her character struggle later on be about big spoilers. I'm gonna big spoiler, but about violence, right? And about the draw of violence. And I think it's interesting that they're choosing to include that as a textual element here in a way that I don't think the games do as much.
And also, well, the show is also doing a really good thing with Ellie about showing like she thinks violence is the way of showing caring, because there's that moment earlier on where Joel kills that one dude out of trauma for his child earlier in episode 1.
Yeah,
and Ellie gets sort of drawn in by that, because she is drawn into seeing violence as a form of caring. So if you compare that to Last of Us 2, which again I won't spoil too much, listeners, but like compare to that's like that's how she thinks that caring is shown. That's how you pay attention to things, by enacting violence for it. And so seeing Joel enact violence for her is sort of her being like, oh, this is how this person's caring for me.
Which again, I think about those lines that the writers have said about like this show is about the ways in which violence and other things can come out of love, how love can be twisted and corrupted and toxic. And I find it so interesting. We'll get to that in a second once we do the letter, how I think that'll actually be a part of Joel's journey of twisting what Bill has said, and making it something toxic. And I think that's such an interesting choice. And again, so we have all of that, and then we have the scene where Joel and Ellie are walking and they're talking, and Joel's explaining how the pandemic happened as far as he understands it, and we get an explicit, you know, stuff about the it came from the flower and stuff, but there's Joel makes a list and he ends it with pancake mix. He says really broad things, and then he chooses one
About what
specific
possibly
item.
caused the
And he's like, oh, and people would have eaten flour, but baked goods, and then he ends on pancake mix, and that doesn't like, oh, okay, pancakes mix, why? But if you remember in episode 1, I know Jessie does, but audience, if you remember in episode 1, Joel and Sarah were this fucking close to eating that. And what that fucking tells me, just like that shot in the first episode and that scene we were talking about with the violence, is that Joel is already thinking about Sarah in the context of Ellie.
Yep.
And that hurts. That has feelings. And
also the other thing too that you were talking about too is just speaking of Craig Mazin as a writer. So Craig Mazin is the writer of Chernobyl.
We got to mention this.
He is someone who's very interested in how systems affect how like large systems affect like daily life, as well as how large systems fail and become points of failure that cause large scale catastrophic things down the line. And so mentioning the fact that it was like one food and that infected all of these people. You said it better than me, but like sort of capitalism.
I basically and I'm just coming from this perspective of like having read a disgusting amount of research papers for I used to work some computer science research work around pandemic spread research. So I've read an ungodly amount about how pandemic spread and things. But one of the papers I read involved discussion of like monocrops and stuff and their effects on things. And basically globalized capitalism contributes to the dangerous over-reliance on monocrop production. And that increases the danger of infections and pandemics and food shortages and problems, because if something happens to that monocrop, everyone on the planet is negatively affected. And this is worth understanding that from a metaphor standpoint, it is fucking brilliant to draw a parallel line between things like dealing with the COVID pandemic, a result of us not closing borders between places to prevent spread, right? And the ways in which the spread of an illness into our monocrops that we rely on for food can cause massive problems. Most people don't realize this, but the bananas that we eat nowadays aren't the bananas we ate 50 years ago. Like, they're literally a different species, basically, because we started only producing one type of banana because it was the most successful selling banana, and we severely limited the biodiversity of bananas. And so then this, and then a fucking infection. I can't remember the exact nature of the infection, but infection came in and destroyed all of the banana crops. And so we keep having to change which type of banana we're using, but we've lost so much biodiversity, right? When we talk about flour, and I think flour is a very specific choice, because flour nowadays, like the type of wheat flour that we generally produce, the type of wheat that we produce is very monocrop in a lot of places around the world. Whereas 200, 300 years ago, there was a vast number of different strains that were regularly grown. So the likelihood of something infecting all of it and getting everywhere around the world, very low. And I think this is very much Mazin's work.
Oh yeah, very much so. Yeah,
very much Mazin's work. And I think it's such a brilliant fucking choice by Mazin to draw attention to the ways in which the constructs of capitalism result in mass overreach of any type of thing that affects our ecosystem. So again, it's interconnecting like 7 or 8 different social issues. Again, also because we have that scene in episode 1, it connects all of these with fucking climate change, which is also connected to monocrop production, because monocrop production is part of what has resulted in the destruction of rainforests. Like, it's brilliant. It's fucking brilliant. And I love that it's got that Mazin grand view. But like, as much as I have criticisms about aspects of how Druckmann writes and things, Druckmann is very good at the personal.
Neil Druckmann, by the way, listeners, he is the writer of the video game and one of the lead writers on the show. And directed,
so I think this combination of Druckmann and Mazin makes for such a clear criticism and discussion.
Yeah, no, it's so they bounce off each other well, I think, as writers, and balance each other well. And one other thing too is I do love the small like generational difference between Ellie and Joel, where like they're looking at the plane that crashed, and Joel's like, yeah, it was whatever, we did it every day, and Joel's like, you fucking flew in the
she's
sky.
Like, the exact line, she's, dude, you had to go up in the sky.
Yeah.
And like, just realizing how much like experiential conceptualization of the world is lost by this pandemic is so fascinating.
And then so let's get to the last bit of the episode.
But I think there's one more thing worth
Yes, please.
mentioning,
Yes.
which is Ellie saying to Joel, Joel says,
yes.
"Don't go up that hill," and Ellie says, "Why?" And Joel's like, "Just don't do it." And Ellie says, "Can it hurt me?" And Joel says, "No."
And what he's talking about is the dead bodies. Yeah, it's the dead bodies that she's going to see.
It's basically when the government, when Fedra, the fucking fascists, which are explicitly in text fascists, like it's not subtle. So when the fascists, you know, or as our beloved boy said, New World Order jackboot fucks, when they were organizing who gets to live and who dies, who gets to go to quarantine zones, they would kill everyone that wasn't going, because dead bodies can't spread the infected. And that line is immediately what precedes the sentiment, "Not today, you New World Order jackpot fucks." Those are the two closest lines in this show, and it's the flashback to that, and I think that's so interesting.
But also the fact too that Joel doesn't think, as you were about to mention, Joel does not think that, like, or at least he doesn't express that seeing those dead bodies was going to hurt Ellie, because he only sees hurt in terms of physical.
He knows that it's emotionally upsetting, but he doesn't recognize that as harm, which is so interesting. Like,
yeah,
it's saying something about
something about his understanding of emotion, which is not very much, and how it can lead to trauma and pain, and it's just like his emotional, his lack of emotional vocabulary and stunted emotional growth, I think, is what it's talking about, and how he doesn't see that for Ellie, and because of that, he's going to perpetuate, even accidentally, this moment I don't think it does for Ellie, but later on, his lack of being able to understand that will lead to trauma for Ellie, because it begets more of it.
Yeah. For sure, it's going to keep harming her. He's going to pass on some of the trauma that he's experienced, and this gets into intergenerational trauma concepts, which I think is a bigger,
which is nice to contrast that with the plane thing. Yeah.
And so I think about that, and then so then we get our beautiful, beautiful story, and then that story ends, right? We get them going to bed, and that's it. And then we cut to Joel and Ellie coming up to the compound. It's probably been 2-3 weeks, maybe. Actually, no, a couple days. Actually, I think it's been a couple of days, because
they were able to play stuff on the radio and things on episode 1 and stuff like that.
Yeah, I think it would have been 3 weeks. It would have been 3 weeks, because he says if Bill doesn't reset the whatever within 2 or 3 weeks, I don't remember what it was. I think it was 2 weeks. If he doesn't reset the thing, then it will blare the distress code, and which is 80s music. And we saw the 80s music start playing at the end of episode 1. Brilliant use of Depeche Mode, by the way. I find it funny that it's the introduction to Depeche Mode for a lot of people on the internet. I'm like, you're missing out. I understand why, though.
Sense8, but yeah, no, I hear.
Yeah, I mean, Sense8. So I'd heard the songs when I was a kid, just because of my parents. But like when Sense8 played, I was like, I got back into into Depeche Mode. Anyway, point is, so they come back, and Joel and Ellie go in, and Joel's obviously worried because, like, Bill's not responding. What's going on? And he's about to go in the room,
and
Ellie finds the letter.
And I do really like the letter for several reasons, because it is like, and this is exactly what you're gonna say, where like we get all those ideas, like, oh, why like the
I actually wrote a section down. I wrote some of it down. One, I love that Bill's letter has these spelt out he's. That is fucking queer humor. It's so funny. Like the line, I think, is like, well, it's probably Joel, because no one else is gonna get through those traps. And I'm like, that is literally queer internet humor. But he says, you know, he talks about like Joel, and he says, like, it's like we were friends almost, and I respect you. And that's the closest that he can get to expressing
You're talking about really the no
emotion. Yeah. But I think that's less about what Bill can express and more about what Joel is able to hear. I think it's Bill saying, I know you're not able to really, really hear this, and I need you to read the entire letter. I need you to read and hear the entire letter. And so then he has the okay. I used to hate the world, and I was happy when everyone died, but I was wrong. Because there was one person worth saving. That's what I did. I saved him, then I protected him. That's why men like you and me are here. We have a job to do. God help any motherfuckers who stand in our way. I leave all of my weapons and equipment to use them. Use them to keep. And here Ellie stops reading the letter, and we see the letter when Joel grabs it.
Keep Tess.
And it says to keep Tess safe. And Joel goes to cry on his own, and I'm like ruined because it hurts so hard because Joel, again, like Joel and Tess, even with each other, kept each other to some emotional distance because they were so damaged and so traumatized by the point that we meet them. And I think the end of episode 2 and even throughout episode 2 is them finally reason like, oh no, I actually care again. And it's too late.
Yeah. And
I think it's worth mentioning that too late thing because it brings it back around. And again, Mason and Druckmann interconnecting the grand with the intimate, right? If episode 1's vignette is saying, if we don't deal with climate change, horrible things will happen. Episode 2's vignette is saying, we're too late to deal with it. We waited too long. And emotionally, that is what Joel is realizing at the end of episode 2 and into episode 3. And then episode 3 hits him with a gut punch of like, no, seriously, you need to fucking care. And we see a slight shift in how Joel is now talking to Ellie.
Because he cares about her. And without spoiling for anybody who has not played the game, I think that idea of like, you need to do whatever you can to protect somebody will get twisted in a way that I don't think Bill ever intended. But Joel will definitely take in toxic ways. And Joel will take in toxic ways, which again, no spoilers for the people who have not played the game. So I'll leave it there.
Yeah, I'll leave out the details, but just, they're gonna take it in places. And I was like, I love this. I love that to say, oh, like this can be twisted and toxic, but for this queer couple, it wasn't. And it's Joel's stunted straight ass that's gonna fuck it up. Like I think that's good. And I think then we get all that, and then we get, them like they get to clean up. Ellie gets some clean clothes. Joel gets some clean clothes. They get packed up, and I was sitting there at this moment, like at that moment, and I was kind of like, I kind of wish it had just ended at the letter, but I'm actually really glad it didn't. And here's why. Because one, it's really establishing those interconnections between Joel is kind of looking after Ellie purposely. Ellie's fascination with violence is increasing. She steals a gun, which is interesting. I'm sure that's going to come up in episode 4. But then,
and Joel putting the seatbelt on her.
Joel putting the seatbelt on her, like it's Sarah, like it's Sarah, like it's Sarah. And then Ellie goes scrounging and gets the CD thing and puts it in, and she's almost about to take it out, and Joel says, no, leave it.
Tape. People will get you in the comments for saying CD, not tape.
Yeah, the tape. Yeah, it is the tape. Sorry, my brain. I'm used to saying CD, but tape. It is a tape. But anyway, so Joel, which God, that's a flashback to my childhood. Tapes in the car. But Joel lets the tape play, and it's Bill and Frank's song. It's Bill and Frank's fucking song that they sung to each other, and that song is the moment that Bill decided to care about Frank and protect Frank, and Joel is deciding to choose protect Ellie here. This show is beautiful. It's everything. And this episode, sorry, I feel like I'm talking too much and like taking over.
No. We're gonna wrap it out here. But no, you are absolutely correct. Do not apologize. It's absolutely wonderful. No, it wraps it out in, I think, in a really nice way that sort of connects all these things and puts a nice wrapper onto it about it being valuable for taking their romance forward, but also just letting it be in itself and how it influences Joel. And I just really love the fact that in this one thing I was also realizing this moment is like the game or the show is not doing anything that the game is doing, even to the point where like the whole in the game, this whole section, this episode was like a level where it's like you go through all this horrible town, like there's some big trauma moments and trauma bonding for Joel and Ellie in it, and we get none of that. They just pass through. I'm sure we'll get some of those elements repurposed in the next episode, but they get to just pass through in it. And the show just like being like, this is just what it's going to be about, and it's going to be a quiet episode about this, I think is a really powerful statement to end the episode on.
I think it is. I just can't get over the fact that we got one of the most beautiful fucking queer romances ever in a show that is adapting something that had significant fucking problems with how it handles this, and it explicitly calls out how it poorly handled it in the game. I really hope that when we get to season 2 of The Last of Us, sorry, I'm so like, I don't even know how to emotionally process.
I want to wrap this up, but yeah, save final thoughts.
My final thought is just, I really hope that Neil Druckmann has heard the criticisms of Last of Us 2 from people of color in the games industry that have talked about it, and does what they did here with changing things. That's my
no, I'll agree with you. And yeah, this was an absolutely beautiful queer story. It did everything for all the reasons we said, and I love this episode. And quite literally, I hope that this gets recognized in many ways. Not the least of which is give the fucking Emmy to Nick Offerman. And I sadly don't know the actor who plays Frank's name, but it is him as well. Like, both of them did so amazing in this episode. And I knew I was gonna like this show. I did not expect this show to deliver on this level, and this is very, very easily going to be one of my favorite episodes of anything ever, definitely of this year. I am very pleased with this and absolutely beautiful. So with that said, everybody, and I'm making the decision now, as we're saying here, I'm going to put this on my main channel. So this is my main channel, everybody. And thank you, everybody, for watching and listening. Take care of yourselves. And thank you for being with us and dealing with us crying. And I hope
God,
you all
I can't believe I've been sobbing for your audience twice in a week.
It's good. For very different, distinct reasons. Very different
everyone's
reasons.
Gonna be like, wow, Aerodog is such a like crying, sobby woman.
You're not, but you're absolutely right. It's funny, but yeah, for very different reasons. But yeah, everybody, live long and prosper. Go subscribe to Aerodog's channel because she is amazing and does great work. Go watch Queer Relativity, and subscribe.
Go watch
her.
Well.
Don't
watch your J.K. Rowling video that we did to do.
Yes.
No, go watch the J.K. Rowling video that we did together.
Yes,
and
but live long and prosper, everybody.
Live long and prosper.